Motherfuckers, we return. This time, building off of emotional neglect and somatic issues to pick up on the path that we didn't take last time, though it is the community theme of the month. Reminder, we're doing a worth challenge in the Discord community. Each week, we're setting a boundary and behavior with ourselves and or others to confront our assumptions about what we believe we're allowed to do. And we're starting to modify the habitual patterns spawned by those beliefs that we've maybe lived with for our entire lifetimes. We talk about our trials and observations on Wednesdays in the channel called Wednesday Meets. Come join. Today, let's talk about worthlessness in the literature. And I'll be honest, if you are like me, you would think that there would be a ton of research linking emotional abuse and neglect to low self worth. Was sort of counting on it for this month, but there is not. So we'll be covering 3 research papers today, sewing together a story from what I could find. How do we end up with negative beliefs about our value? What type of trauma from whom specifically imparts it most strongly? And what can we do about it? I want to remind everyone that we're approaching the word worthlessness very literally, as in believing we are worth less than others, perhaps not fully devoid of worth altogether. This connects with feeling useless and or feeling overburdened by responsibility because we must be, and or accepting subpar treatment from others in all areas of life. Worthlessness beliefs are sneaky, perhaps subconscious, and rather than exploring explicit thoughts of lesser than dumb, we might need to spot them through observing our historical actions and reactions, acceptance of low quality environments, and magical ability to adapt to situations that suck butt, estimating that, quote, well, it's good enough for me. So let's start the conversation and see if it sparks anything for you. Community feedback, always desired. Now, you know the deal. This is the summary version of the pod. For the deep details, hit up that extended nerd edition. And one more reminder. Tiers are changing in August on Patreon. So just don't change your subscription if you like what you're getting, and you'll be grandfathered in at this level. Great. Now let's get into the papers. First up, we have the prospective contribution of childhood maltreatment to low self-worth, low relationship quality, and symptomology across adolescence. A developmental organizational perspective. It's by Megan Flynn, Dante Sacchetti, and Fred Rogosh. It was published in Developmental Psychology in 2014. And we begin by talking about childhood maltreatment, a title that encompasses abuse as well as neglect. Abuse can fall into our usual domains of emotional, physical, and or sexual mistreatment. Neglect can be physical, not tending to a child's basic biological needs, or emotional, not acknowledging or providing support for their responses to the world. Both suggest to the child's brain, you don't matter. You aren't worth protecting, caring for, listening to, treating kindly. This thought, over time and repeated confirmation, becomes a belief, a foundational understanding which all subsequent thought and behaviors build off. It's also known in the literature as a negative schema or negative working model. The child might learn that they are worth less, a negative self schema, and also that they should anticipate corresponding treatment from others. Cruelty, dismissal, betrayal. These are negative other schemas. Together, they can explain attachment patterns. If we anticipate negative treatment from others, we become anxious or avoidant about relationships. When we enter our first peer relationships with these beliefs already at the helm, then we end up recreating the family dynamics that instilled the schema in the first place. We seek people who fit our working model of the world, in which we are deplorable or lesser than. Then we accidentally, subconsciously repeat the pattern again and again so that we always receive the same result, so that the belief appears true. In this way, the family environment becomes reflected in the broader social environment. This causes low self-worth to become a permanent fixture rather than something we grow out of. And it also corresponds with depression and addiction. Childhood maltreatment is correlated with inaccurate internalizing and externalizing behaviors that are used for self protection. In other words, to reduce cognitive dissonance and create a cohesive story about the world, we can either accept we are terrible, everything is our fault, internalizing the treatment, or we can accept that the world is terrible. Nothing is our fault, externalizing the treatment. When we internalize, we often become depressed, since, quote, we are the problem. When we externalize, we often turn to drugs and other avoidance behaviors, since no matter what we do, the world fucks us. Why bother trying to regulate ourselves? Per these authors' estimations, then, childhood maltreatment should correspond with low self-worth, poor relationships in and out of the family, and internalizing, externalizing inaccuracies. And from their research, what did they find? Well, those things appear to be true, and they appear to be stable over time. The childhood environment creates a mindset that corrupts later attempts at relationship, puts the individual at higher risk of depression and anxiety, and disrupts the ability to emotionally self-regulate. If we believe we are worth dirt as the basis for the rest of our thoughts, we have a hard time reevaluating situations or bringing ourselves back to a neutral or positive emotional state. So, they are findings that we might expect logically when mentalizing, with one interesting detail to mention. Specifically, it's low quality maternal relationships that seem to impart low self worth and heighten internalizing, externalizing behaviors. The authors suggest that these result from the negative self beliefs we spoke of, and also that daily maltreatment interactions themselves increase negative self valuations and internalizing responses. So, we're affected by our already established beliefs and also directly affected by mother's ongoing behaviors daily, increasing hostility, which can be internalized or externalized. Corresponding mental health challenges and emotional coping behaviors can be seen, which often snowball into adolescent delinquency, drug use, and escapist relationships. It is the beliefs and the ongoing behaviors that create and maintain low self-worth and many resulting negative behavioral patterns, according to this paper. That's number one for you. Next up, the relationship between negative self-concept, trauma, and maltreatment in children and adolescents, a meta-analysis. It's by Daniela M. Melamed, Jessica Botting, Katie Lofthouse, Laura Pass, Richard Miser Stedman. It was published in Clinical Child and Family Psychological Review in 2024. And we begin this time by discussing self self-concept. It is the cumulative thoughts, beliefs, and observations of one's self, our identity, our image, our understanding of who we are in relation to the world and everyone in it. Self-concept might sound like no big deal or something we can fake our way through with positivity, but it is deeply rooted in our subconscious psychology. We cannot simply override or replace it. In fact, it is correlated with a large variety of psychopathologies, with negative self schema, negative self concept. As we have discussed already, we have a limited ability to help ourselves when life is also negative. When we can't correct our thoughts or change our emotions because both are telling us that we ain't worth shit, we end up with mental illness and poor life outcomes. It should come as no surprise then that one of the three criteria for CPTSD is poor self concept. The ICD-11 more specifically refers to this concept as beliefs about oneself as being worthless or diminished with accompanying feelings of guilt or shame. As such, these authors set out to review prior studies connecting childhood trauma, maltreatment, and self-concept in the attempt to understand how large the effects of childhood events are and what factors specifically are responsible for creating the pipeline between childhood traumas and ongoing feelings of worthlessness. And their review found traumas correspond with poorer self concept. Specifically, this relationship is boosted by factors of 1. The trauma consistency, or number of traumatic exposures, and 2, the type of trauma exposure, with sexual trauma having the greatest negative impact. This fits with prior findings that sexual trauma generally correlates with more negative outcomes in life, perhaps with negative concept from the abuse as the driving cause. In my words, it also fits with the general finding that women exposed to trauma have poorer life outcomes compared to males. Female children report more sexual abuse. Female adults report more negative life qualities following traumas. One might then believe that females may, in general, suffer from a greater sense of worthlessness, which mediates the relationship between the 2 points, and society might cement that view for us. However, this was not supported by this current review. What was supported is the ubiquitous nature of this relationship. Across gender, country, and economic quality of that country, the connection between experiencing childhood maltreatment and later developing poor self-worth appears stable. And that is paper 2, bringing us to the paper that we will spend the most time with today. But first, I'm going to go rescue this butterfly that got stuck in my porch netting. Family environment and self-esteem development. A longitudinal study from age 10 to 16. It's by Samantha Krause, Ulrich Orth, and Richard W. Robbins from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology 2019. And here, in a slight deviation from last time where we spoke about self-concept, we start by discussing self-esteem. Research suggests that strong self-esteem correlates with positive experiences in social life, career, bodily functioning, and mental wellness. One might say, lifetime satisfaction or destruction depends on esteem. Within self-esteem is self-image. And we don't know how positive image or esteem are developed. Why do some of us regard ourselves as if we are worms or the dirt where they wriggle? Why do some of us think we are worth less? These authors ran a longitudinal study across 6 years to examine qualities of the childhood home that reportedly affected esteem all the way through adolescence to see if the relationships held true. And they began by looking at parenting behavior and children's self-esteem. The prevailing theory of self-development states that social interactions create our self-image. The way we are treated informs us of our value, our worth. Starting from zero understanding of self, we first interact with our parents and family members, which lays down the cement that becomes the foundation of our self valuation. If we are interacted with and responded to in an easeful, appropriate, predictable, comforting manner, this contributes to positive self schema, self beliefs, as well as secure attachment. We cannot separate self esteem from attachment. Understanding of self informs our expectations of others and our relationships with them. For all of these reasons, the present study looked at parenting behaviors and qualities of the home environment as influences of esteem. Those behaviors and qualities that they examined were parental warmth, parental hostility, parental monitoring, and parental involvement in the child's education, as well as the household characteristics of family values, maternal and paternal depression, economic hardship, and paternal presence. And in the long nerd version of this very show, we're going to run through a description of each, along with the rationale behind its examination, which we will do now if you're streaming it. I'll be screaming it. Or something like that. All right. One more interesting point that they assessed: the vice versa effect of child's self esteem on these family qualities. Research tells us that family dynamics are affected by all players in the system. So the authors also examined how the child's self understanding could affect family characteristics over time. And they found positive influences on child self esteem included parental warmth, monitoring, and paternal presence. Negative influences included economic disparity and maternal depression. Strong child self esteem positively influenced family values, and low economic status had an effect that overall seemed to be mediated by confounding factors of low parental warmth and monitoring, doubling down on the importance of these influences. Let's talk about each one in greater detail. For the greatest detail, you know it, get into that long form episode. But in contrast to expectation, parental monitoring had a direct correlation with high child self esteem, suggesting that even strongly surveilled children have better self regard than those who are attentionally neglected. However, as they say, monitoring needs to be clearly distinguished from control. Monitoring suggests that the parent is purely interested in the child rather than interfering or reducing their autonomy, such as in the case of controlling the child. Surprisingly, parental hostility and involvement in education were not shown to have significant effects on the child's esteem. That said, the correlation that was detected did move in the expected direction, which is to say, parental hostility reduced esteem and educational involvement improved it. Perhaps just not, quote, significantly, which might be an artifact of the study's limitations, per the author's suggestions. There were not many reported incidences of hostility in the sample, especially compared to parental warmth, and this could be skewing the research findings. Next point: economic hardship negatively predicted child self esteem, partially through corresponding parental behaviors. A stressed parent is not necessarily an attentive or warm parent, and authors suggest that low finances contribute to low esteem through degrading the parent child relationship. It also might occur through degrading the parent parent relationship, which then trickles down to negatively affect the child. Additionally, financial differences from peers might be an isolated factor that further damages self esteem outside of the home when socializing is again challenging or impossible. On the subject of parental warmth, the authors had more interesting things to say than you might expect. Of course, a coddled child is generally assumed to be a self loving or even self entitled child. And as expected, high self esteem was correlated with higher parental warmth. But the relationship seems to be a little more complicated than that due to the bi-directional nature of relationship dynamics. A child with high self-esteem is more likely to elicit and receive parental warmth, but a child with low self-esteem is likely to eventually spawn parental warmth when their challenges spawn compassion and care from the supervising parent. Hopefully. So, a parent who is warmly responsive can positively affect a child with low esteem, even if their own prior hostility partially created the negative self regard. It's never too late to turn things around by behaving differently. Now, let's talk about gender differences. Originally, we stated that paternal presence predicted higher esteem. However, the authors note that this effect disappears during mediation analysis, resulting in a non significant effect. So, in fact, perhaps paternal presence is not implicated as a strong factor in child esteem development. A controversial finding, and one I would love to hear anecdotal evidence for and or against. And in the case of the mother, depression was found to be a negatively impactful factor, but corresponding parental qualities, such as hostility or lack of monitoring, were not found to cause this effect. Instead, the authors suggest that an uncomfortable home environment might negatively impact child socializing, or the mother's depression itself might suggest to the child that they are not worth full. If they were valuable, surely mom would feel better. One might also think that genetics are to blame, and yet, if this was the case, paternal depression should also correspond with low child esteem. It does not. Combined with our first study, it appears that the mother's emotional and mental health specifically are tantamount to the child's positive self image and sense of worth. Dads in their stereotypical role, maybe not so much. Something to get your wheels spinning if you suffer from low self worth and diverse experiences between your parents. And lastly, on the backward subject of child esteem affecting the family environment, they found that it influenced only one factor: family values. This is probably because a happy and healthy child suggests positive things about the parents and home, which improves their esteem and their commitment to the household. In conclusion, parental warmth, monitoring, and maternal mental wellness are highly implicated in positive child self esteem. But being overly warm, inaccurately complimentary, for example, may actually diminish the child's esteem. Monitoring with an iron fist may become controlling and abusive, and maternal wellness cannot come at the expense of child autonomy or social exploring. So the results are clear and yet rather complex and interrelated. Feeling cared for appropriately makes a big difference. What is clear is that attention and affection matter, especially from the primary parent, which most often is the mother. And in a cruel joke from the psychological universe, a child's esteem has effect on both the parenting behaviors they will receive as well as the quality of the family environment, so that a spiral of doom could be created should an ailing mother with economic hardship influence a low esteem child, which then further depresses and stresses the mother, perhaps past the point of being able to engage in warm parenting behaviors that could correct the child's low self worth. Another point to perhaps reflect on deeply. And In one last surprise, we touch on this paper very briefly for our closer. Conclusion for the day. The roles of shame and poor self concept in explaining low social connection among adult survivors of childhood emotional maltreatment. It's by William P. Archuleta, Patricia L. Kaminsky, and Nicholas D. Ross from Psychological Trauma 2024. Let's pull this all together. Their greatest finding is emotional maltreatment, abuse, or neglect often leads to social disconnection. The child assesses themselves as incorrect based on their parental experiences, perhaps of neglect or hostility, which then increases chronic shame, which then reduces their likelihood of forming other relationships. This then reduces opportunities for corrective experiences to take place, allowing the child's low self esteem or high sense of unworthiness to persist or even deepen over time. This explains concisely how emotional unhealth at home creates an avalanche of self diminishment that persists across a dissatisfying and unsafe feeling lifetime of assessing oneself worth less than others. I hope this discussion of worthlessness has helped you think about the mirage you may have been living through since childhood and the personal factors that may have made it appear very real. I hope you find healing on the other side of acknowledging the hurt and reconsidering your role as a relational being. It's through continued experiences with social connections that we have the opportunity to re examine and redevelop our relationship to self and self worth. Come hang out in the Discord community if you're ready to take on the July Worth Challenge, which is actually running through the beginning of August. You got time. Thank you as always, for being here. It's worth a lot to me, and I'll talk to you real soon. Bye bye.